What do you think about Biden dropping out of the presidential race? I was surprised by that.
Well, I think that he hasn't really necessarily dropped out because he can always come back in. The kind of the template for the 2016 election is the 1968 election. In that election, you had a series of people who were assumed to be the Democratic nominee. To begin with, at the beginning of the year, it was simply assumed that Lyndon Johnson would run for a second full term. The 22nd Amendment, we always think of the 22nd Amendment as limiting a president to 2 terms. The actual language is 2 terms plus 2 years. So that if you're the vice president and you inherit the office because the president dies, then you still can have 2 terms, 2 of your own full terms afterwards. And so as LBJ became president in '63, he only had a year and a fraction.
I get it. Got it.
So he had an opportunity for 2 full terms.
Got it.
And so at the beginning of '68, it was simply assumed that Lyndon Johnson would have the nomination. The Vietnam War was going badly, and so Gene McCarthy came in as the peace candidate. And
on the Democrat side.
On the Democratic side. And the anti-war activists were like generally what we think of as like the hippies. And so there was a thing called Get Clean for Gene, where you would cut your hair and put on a suit and go door to door and look very respectable, so that you could go and talk to the kind of normal middle class voters, what they call normies now. And so there was not the Iowa caucus yet. That doesn't start until '76. So the first contest in '68 is the New Hampshire primary. And Lyndon Johnson actually won the New Hampshire primary, but everyone acted as if he lost because he only got like 48% of the vote. And it was assumed that as president he should.
And Gene got
like 42 or
oh wow, all right.
So it was he still won, but it was such a narrow victory that at that point Johnson recognized that he actually had to deal with the anti-war movement, and that this was not going to go well for him. So instead of being embarrassed, because like this was a man who was the master of the Senate, who was like a figure.
Master of the Senate when he was a senator.
When he was like Harry Reid, he was the head of the Senate.
Okay.
Or
I got it.
McConnell now.
Got it.
And so he had been a figure in American public life since the days of FDR. And to
meaning
now
20 years or something.
Oh,
30 years.
Yeah, about 30 years.
Okay.
And so to lose to someone who was barely known was simply humiliating. And so Lyndon Johnson then dropped out.
Wow.
And
right after the New Hampshire primary, or soon after?
Soon after the New Hampshire primary.
Wow.
And he dropped out saying he was doing this for the good of the nation, that he was going to devote himself full time to ending the war. And so he didn't want politics to get in the way of his negotiating with the North Vietnamese.
While being president. I got it.
So he was going to use his last year as president to be completely focused on negotiation and not be worried about what he called, petty politics. So what happened is that even though Eugene McCarthy was the person who slayed the dragon, he was not going to be the person who was going to profit by that, because Robert F. Kennedy saw this now as an opportunity for him to jump in.
And what was Robert Kennedy doing
Robert Kennedy, when his brother John F. Kennedy became president, John F. Kennedy appointed Robert as Attorney General.
Okay, right.
And he served as Attorney General still through the remaining of the Johnson administration.
I got it.
But then resigned to run for as senator from New York.
Okay.
Even though he wasn't from New York, but New York has this tradition of accepting people who really aren't New Yorkers.
Got it.
As being their senators.
Got it.
And so, as senator from New York, he was now going to be the anti-war candidate. And the Kennedys actually were hawks during the Cold War. But over the 60s, Robert F. Kennedy had evolved into being a much more dovish person. He actually used to work with with the with
Oh, right,
McCarthy.
with Gene?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Uh-huh.
With back during the Red Hunt,
Okay.
and he had evolved from being like a strict anti-communist to now being like, oh, we can negotiate with North Vietnamese.
Okay.
And so while Eugene McCarthy actually did the work of slaying the dragon, Robert F. Kennedy was now going to come in and reap all the benefits from that. The administration, of course, there were people who were, of course, pro-war, who said like this would be a disaster for American foreign policy if we abandoned an ally. And so they coalesced around the vice president at the time, who was Hubert Humphrey. And so you go into the rest of the primaries with kind of a three-way split of Eugene McCarthy and Robert F. Kennedy fighting for the anti-war vote, and Hubert Humphrey fighting for the kind of, steady state, keep things as they are vote.
When did Hubert Humphrey jump in?
Hubert Humphrey jumped in after LBJ left.
Okay. Oh, all right. So both Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey jumped into the race.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so that's the thing where even though the other guy had done the work of slaying the dragon, he was not going to be the one to benefit from it.
I see.
And as they say, like America has this romance with the Kennedys. So Robert Kennedy was on the path to winning the nomination. At the time, we didn't have as many primaries as we do now. That only came about in a reform in 1972, and 76 was like the first presidential cycle that was primary intensive. So most of the states were still done by, what they call the cigar-filled room, or smoke-filled room.
Got it.
Of the party bigwigs all just kind of deciding how their state would go. And the big question was going to be who won California, because California was, one of the most populous states, and it also had a primary. And so when Robert Kennedy won the California primary, it was obvious that was it. He was going to have the nomination. And in fact, even that night, Robert Kennedy and Daley, the mayor of Chicago, talked on the phone. Daley was kind of one of the representatives of, the establishment. And so if Daley was going to embrace Kennedy, then that pretty much meant that he was going to win the establishment over. Unfortunately, Robert Kennedy was then assassinated that same night after his victory speech. And so McGovern jumped in to fill the role of Robert Kennedy. And McGovern, of course, then would be the nominee. George McGovern would be the nominee in '72. And so now,
what was McGovern doing?
McGovern was he was a senator as well, I believe, from Nebraska.
Okay, so now at this point you have McGovern, you have McCarthy, and you have Hubert Humphrey.
Yes.
Okay.
And so you go into the convention without a clear winner. And as I say, this is where the smoke-filled room becomes important, because they weren't now the conventions really are kind of meaningless. As I say, like they're useful for having prime time television audience to have the party lay out their platform, but they really don't decide anything, except for picking the vice president. Because usually you go into the convention knowing who the nominee for president will be.
Got it.
But in '68, you actually went into the Democratic convention having no idea who was going to come out on top. And eventually it was Hubert Humphrey who came out on top, even though he was kind of the underdog throughout the primaries.
Got it.
And as I say, that the same kind of thing could happen this time.
Oh wait, Hubert Humphrey, right? The VP.
The VP
came out on top. Okay.
And so in this cycle, what you're going to have is you still have O'Malley in there, but it's really a race between Hillary and Bernie Sanders. And they each represent. The joke always is that Republicans fall in line and Democrats fall in love. That the Republicans usually have a structure of whoever is next in line will get the nomination. This cycle, that's not happening because Trump's disrupted everything. But for the Democrats, it still really has to be who do they actually love. And as we see by the size of the rallies, the one they love is Bernie. And Hillary she's there, but she's unloved. And so you could still have a situation where the two of them divide the party, and then Biden could still walk in at the convention as the peacemaker. Or, as they say, you even have like the whole question about the emails, that Hillary could be under indictment. And you can't really nominate a candidate of someone to be president who's under indictment.
Right, I see.
And so then Biden could still walk in as the savior of the party.
I got it. Like McGovern did.
Like Humphrey.
Humphrey, I'm sorry, like Humphrey did.
Well, I mean, Humphrey, he was a bad savior because he lost the election. But honestly, he still lost it very narrowly. That the 68 election was one of the closest elections.
I see.
And
wait, but at that time, back in '68, who was the VP? McGovern?
Humphrey.
Humphrey, right, okay, I was
Yeah.
confusing names, right, so therefore, the parallel is Humphrey stepped in, and this time Biden will step in.
Yeah, the same way that Humphrey never planned on running in '68. But it simply, the lot fell to him because Johnson dropped out.
I see.
And this is the same thing where even if Biden doesn't plan on running, the lot could still fall to him, because the situation could be that the party's either divided and needs someone in the middle to hold it back together,
I see.
or it could be that the person who's ahead is under indictment, and so you need
Who would indict? Would it be the Attorney General? Who would
Well,
indict?
the FBI is currently investigating.
Oh, I see. So it's the indictment could come from the FBI.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to come from the administration. It could just.
Well, I mean, the FBI is, the Department of Justice.
Got it.
So,
Got it. All right.
Same way that even though Nixon was the head of the government, the FBI was still investigating Nixon.
I got it.
Back during Watergate.
Got it.
As battered and bruised as the system is, there's still, the facade that it's the rule of law, and that
Got it.
it doesn't matter who you are, that the laws are supposed to operate.
Got it. All right. Great. Awesome.